Can I talk to you?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Okay, take care of him.
Thank you.
My wife, Denise, said...
You're not gonna give white card draw.
Is that true?
Commander Players. I'm a designer.
I don't make
Color pie.
decisions. That's handled by the
Council of Colors.
Yeah, well, you're the head of...
Magic the Gathering R&D.
You make a recommendation, they're gonna listen to you, aren't they?
I make recommendations all the time. The final decision rests with the board, not me.
That's it.
No white card draw?
I'm afraid so.
Can we, take a little walk? I won't take long, I promise you. I know you got a lot of...
Fine.
So I'm looking at the brochure last night. It says that...
This company makes over $1.3 billion a year selling cardboard.
And you're telling me you can't...
Give me one good white card draw spell.
In good faith, not one.
John, I waived my faith.
I'm not asking you to
I know
waive
you're not
it.
asking
Nobody
me.
asked you to waive the fee, okay? Because I can raise the money. I can come up with the money. I already came up with $22,000. I paid you guys. And I'm telling you that I swear to God on my life that I will pay for this if you just give me the opportunity. I'm only getting 20 hours on the job. You understand?
I understand.
I can do this. I can pay. I swear to God, I'll pay you the money back. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I promise you I will. You just got to trust me. I give you my word as a man. Please.
Could you take your hands off me, please? I've done everything I can do. I'm sorry.
No, you haven't.
Yes.
Let's go inside and talk about it. I'm not asking you anymore.
Mark Rosewater.
I'm telling you.
You are going to print white card draw.
You understand me? Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Don't move. Don't move. Don't even think about it. Okay. Put your hands down. Just put them down.
Commander Players.
I know how upset you are, but this is not the way to handle it. Okay?
Hey,
we're gonna get
you can't
hurt.
go
You
through
know
this
how-
way.
Put your hands. We're gonna get hurt.
Put your hands up. Put them up. Put them up.
God.
Yeah, give me a gun.
I don't have a gun.
They don't have guns. They're not armed.
Okay. All right. Put your hands down. Sit down. So no, get up.
You failed to realize
Just get
the
over
jeopardy
there. Don't
you
move.
are putting.
The game in.
Shut up. We have to talk about. Shut
Before
up. Don't move.
Late. John, wait. Stop. Okay, look, just stop, because if you do this, you're on an irreversible course of action. You understand that? Put on the brakes and think about this. We really need to talk here.
Commander Players.
Back up, please.
What?
Just do as he says.
Would you please back up?
What are you doing?
I'm taking your advice. I'm not taking no for an answer. Back up.
Okay. That guy's funny.
A lot of money to spend on magic cards.
Hey! What are you doing? Get back over there. Sit on your hands. Sit on your hands over there. Get over there. Turner, everybody, get out. Turner, get out. Sit on your hands. Put your hands under your butt. Don't anybody move. All right, hey.
Wizards of the Coast is
It's under new management now. Yeah, from now on,
card draw.
for everybody. How's that?
Oh, righteous, man.
Sorry, it's my jam. It's my vibe.
Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I am your host, Andy. And I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony, tender of the frog puddle Maddox.
I don't tend the frog puddle, but I enjoy the frog puddle.
Did you not tend it a little bit? I thought you said somebody had tried to drain it and then did you plug it back up or did somebody else plug it back up?
Somebody else plugged it back up.
But-
Drama in the woods.
But,
There's
but would you have plugged it back up had you
I
come
thought
across
about
it?
if I had a shovel or something.
Can't just put a rock there or something?
Maybe. Where am I going to find a rock these days?
Tell people about your frog puddle, Anthony.
Well, it's not my frog puddle. So there's a little park here. There's a little forest. It's great for a little daily walk, see some nature. And there's a puddle which looks like just a gross, nasty puddle, but it's actually full of frogs. And I delight in seeing all these frogs. Unfortunately, someone thought I should dig out this little drainage ditch that goes across the path.
Yeah,
so the puddle drains.
is the result of some poorly planned civic works, the way they put that pathway in. It just happens to have created a little area where water doesn't drain, which maybe not great long term, but I agree. I like the frogs.
I just think it's really interesting to observe this like interaction that people are having totally without seeing these people, because clearly somebody went and scooped out this drainage ditch, and then somebody else came and like made a little dam, but it's drained again, and the frogs are sad. But I'm sure they're fine. There's so many places in the woods for frogs, right?
I think you can call that your frog puddle. If you got hit by a car and died tomorrow, I'd put up a plaque there that said the Anthony Maddox Memorial Frog Puddle.
But I'm very confused by all of that.
Why are you confused?
Usually you put up a plaque like where somebody gets hit by the car, you put up those bikes that are covered in flowers that are really sad.
That's
just be like, this some guy enjoyed looking at frogs.
There's tons of people that die and they get like a bench somewhere or whatever. Like for you, I would put up a little plaque right there, and below it would say, "Don't drain the puddle." in quotation
Frogs
marks.
live here.
This is not a puddle cast, though. This is a podcast about Magic the Gathering. This week, we're going to be talking about Mark Rosewater's annual State of Design article. For those that aren't aware, Mark Rosewater, the head designer of Magic, every year at the end of Magic's season, which roughly goes summer to summer, summer's kind of their slow time, he writes an article that is inspired by the State of the Union address, where he basically talks about the state of Magic design broadly and reviews lessons learned from that year's previous sets. So we're going to do kind of a State of Design podcast where we weigh in on the state of design from our perspective, perhaps, and observe some trends in Mark's observations, and just talk about how that affects Magic as a whole. Before we do that, though, Anthony, we have to do a Pack One, Pick One from a listener-submitted cube. This week's cube comes to us from listener James. The cube is called Cube of Stuff I Already Had. It's a 386-card vintage cube. And Anthony, you'll be delighted to hear this is somebody that was pushed to build a cube based on our Building a Cube Out of the Cards You Own podcast episode.
That's amazing. That's one more success.
It happened.
Put it in the check column. We did it.
It happened.
I love to hear it.
Thank you, James, for doing that and for sending it in by email. It really does bring us a lot of joy to get more people into the cube format. And I got to say, I mean, I really do just think cubes of cards you own could be super interesting for all the reasons we mentioned. So, put aside all of that Power Max nonsense, even put aside all that design theory if you want, and just put cards you like in a pile and see what comes from it.
Something I think is really interesting is looking through the list. I think there are just some really strong themes running through this, which I think is, like, as we discussed in that episode, just kind of emergent from the fact that the cards you own are going to be around the kinds of themes that you're interested in.
Yeah, or at the very least, you can start to see like a little shred of a theme, and if that excites you, then you can start pushing the cube that way after you've already got a list and you can draft it, which is the first step to being a cube designer, is making a cube. So I'm going to read the contents of our Pack 1, Pick 1. Then we're going to throw it over to Anthony, who's going to tell us what he's taking from this pack. The pack is Natural State, Weapon Surge, Topple, Auriok Champion, Steel Hellkite, Infiltrator's Mage Mark, Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Oh, God. How do you say that word?
I pronounce it Gary.
Thraben Doomsayer, Desecration Demon, Renata Called to the Hunt, Crystal Shard, Iron Mirror, Talisman of Progress, Divination, and Vivid Grove. Before you tell us what you're going to take, Anthony, is asphodel, is that a real word that people think is a magic word, or is that a made-up magic word?
I think that's got to be a region on Theros, right? That would make the most sense.
That would make the most sense, but sometimes they use real words in there, and then Magic players don't realize it, myself included.
The other option is it's a Eurasian plant in the lily family. I don't think that's what we're talking about.
But that should tell us how to pronounce it, at least.
Asphodel.
All right, with that solved, Anthony, what are you taking out of this pack?
The first thing that actually jumps out to me is Natural State is not usually a card that I'm super high on. This is a, disenchant effect. But just looking at this pack, there are so many artifacts and enchantments, and looking at the list as well, there are tons and tons of them. It's maybe a little bit, if you're just looking at the column view of this cube, not as clear, because a bunch of these artifacts and enchantments are colored or have a color identity or are multicolored, so they've been grouped in different places.
Or are creature enchantments, which you would see under the creatures, like Renata.
So I don't think I'm taking it, but just that's something that crossed my mind as I was looking through this pack and seeing so many artifacts and enchantments. I think the things that are actually standing out to me most are Talisman of Progress. Ramp and fixing is often very powerful in environments that maybe are a little bit less built with having some really highly aggressive archetypes in mind. Vivid Grove also stands out. The Vivid lands are quite powerful. They fix you for any mana color twice, which I think is really powerful in a lot of contexts. I might even play this in a non-green deck.
That would be a stretch, but maybe. I wouldn't call them very powerful. Sometimes you're very generous in your pack one pick ones, but you say that all these cards are very powerful. But where do you think Vivid Lands rank in terms of all non-basics ever printed, just on pure power level?
I would put them very highly. I mean, there's all the untapped lands that I think are just going to be stronger, right? You know, the fast lands, the slow lands, the fetches and shocks, all these things. They're probably right below bounce lands then to me.
Really?
I think so.
Interesting. I would put all the tapped creature lands up higher than these for sure. I would put the Thriving Lands above these. I would put Evolving Wilds,
Thriving
Terramorphing
Lands,
Expanse,
definitely, yeah.
Ash Barrens.
Yeah.
I would put all these cards above these. But carry on.
And then as far as more threatening cards, Thraben, Doomsayer, and Desecration Demon and Renata are all very powerful cards as well. So those are the things I'm kind of looking at. Crystal Shard is very cool, but I'm not seeing that there's like the support here that's a pack one, pick one kind of card. I think I'm leaning towards just taking the Talisman, but I kind of want to take this Desecration Demon.
I'm taking Crystal Shard for sure. 100%.
Really?
Windmill slamming that thing. I haven't looked in detail at the list, but Crystal Shard is such a fun card when you get to do the thing. And I think in a slower environment, you get to do the thing pretty often. So it is, I would say, pretty committal to blue. You pretty much have to be in a blue deck. You don't want to pay the 3 generic mana to activate Crystal Shard. But once you have that blue mana up, for those that don't know, this is a 3 mana artifact. It has an activated ability that you can pay either 3 generic or a blue and tap. You tap either way to return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. What this means is that if your opponent wants to prevent their things from being bounced, they basically have to keep 2 mana up all the time. I say 2, not 1, because what you can do is on their end step, Crystal Shard their thing, they pay the 1, then you untap and Crystal Shard it again to put it back in their hand. And that tax is very real in environments where you're accruing this value over time. What it's more used for, though, is bouncing your own stuff. You just choose not to pay the 1 because you're the controller of the creature. So you can put your creatures back in your hand to recur enter the battlefield abilities, to save them from combat, to save them from a removal spell. It just is a very valuable card in a slower environment, and that's what I'm going to take for sure. My next thing is Talisman, for sure, after that. And then after that, I think it is a steep drop-off for me in terms of how excited I am to pack one, pick one, a card between Crystal Shard and Talisman and the rest of the pack. But I could see being on Desecration Demon or Renata or something very reasonably.
So I'm a little bit surprised to hear you say that. Would you put this in a deck where you had literally 0 creatures that had an enter the battlefield ability that generated some value?
I'm going to say yes, but it's going to be very hard, I think, to end up in a deck that doesn't have that to some degree.
I'm looking through the list, though, and if I just search for creatures that enter the battlefield, in blue specifically, even a lot of these just aren't relevant. Like, True Name Nemesis. You can bounce that and rename your opponent. There's basically
True Name Nemesis is in here. That's pack one, pick one, True Name Nemesis. That's what I want to do.
There's Thassa's Oracle, Icefall Regent, and
Thassa's Oracle is
Void Mage.
great.
Husher. I mean, that is great, but that's just so few options there.
I'm not going to be playing mono blue. I'm going to be playing some other colors. I believe I will find ways to abuse it, and I just have a lot of fun playing with the card. It was in my cube for a long time, and I'm going to take this opportunity to play with it again. It's that simple.
Fair enough.
So you're on the Mana Rock. I'm on the cool Crystal Shard. James, thank you for the nice email and for sending in your cube list. Seriously, so exciting to see people that have actually gotten into the format based on what we say into dumb microphones in Anthony's basement. So thank you for that.
I'm really curious to hear how long True Name Nemesis remains in this cube.
And there's like a Grizzlebrand in here too and stuff. Grizzlebrand, is there a way to reanimate it?
Have you ever hardcast a Grizzlebrand?
No, I don't think I have.
It's a thing you can do, technically, in Magic the Gathering.
When testing early versions of the Degenerate Microcube, I did put a Grizzlebrand in off of an Aether Vial.
That is wild.
Does that
Actually,
count
I feel
as
like that does
hardcasting?
come up. No, it does. It definitely doesn't.
I had to wait 8 turns.
That does come up in that cube as well, where it's like, okay, we're all out of resources, but I have an Aether Vial, so I will technically be able to put in this Eldrazi in 12 turns, right? So it's just like, yep.
It does happen.
At a board state where we can determine the end.
Anyway, we can't get distracted. Thanks again, James. If you want to have a pack from your cube on Lucky Paper Radio, listen in. This is different than the same thing I've said for the past 100 episodes. Anthony has made a nice form where you can submit your cube because I have gotten way behind on the emails. I used to get every email and take it and copy the details over to a spreadsheet, and then I started getting too many emails. I couldn't keep up, so I just now kind of look at my inbox and pick one more or less at random, which is not the best process. So if you want to have your cube on the show, submit it to that form. And I'm going to say submit it to that form even if you have emailed in the past and your cube was not on the show. I know it's annoying to ask you to submit it twice, but I'm sorry, I wasn't that organized. So that form will be linked in the show notes. You can also find that form at luckypaper.co/podcast/submityourcube, hyphenated between the submit, your, and cube. People get it. People know how to work websites. Before we dive into analyzing the State of Design article, I want to make sure we know what we're covering, because if people don't read the article themselves, they might not know what sets this commentary covers. And it's basically everything from Midnight Hunt through to Streets of New Capenna. So we're talking Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Streets of New Capenna, Commander Legends, Baldur's Gate. And he doesn't mention any of the other kind of products. He does mention Double Feature briefly, which is in there technically. So we're really talking about those like 5 sets, and that's what all of the State of Design stuff is about. What were your first impressions of this article, Anthony?
For those of you who maybe don't know, Mark Rosewater is the lead designer at Wizards of the Coast. He's the guy in charge in a lot of ways. Especially he drives sort of the vision of what Magic is going to be. So it's less about, he's less involved in should this counterspell cost 2 or 3 mana, and more involved in what kind of sets are we going to design? What's our overall sort of approach to designing Magic? Like, what's the color pie going to be like, and what's the flavor of these sets? And he goes through each individual set and talks about lessons learned and things that really worked well in those sets. He also gives some overall highlights, which I'm not surprised by any of these. All of these make a lot of sense.
I was surprised by 1 or 2, but we'll get there.
He mentions that Wizards really pushed the boundaries on what Magic can do, and I think this is absolutely true. I do keep thinking that there are sets that came out this year that turns out they came out a long time ago, but yeah, I mean, they've just been changing with like double-faced cards and companions and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like in the last couple of years, Magic has really changed in a big way. Another big thing he calls out is that they've made some adjustments to the color pie, which I think is interesting. And I'm curious to dig into this in more detail. I'm sure he will, or maybe has shared more of this. But the biggest thing they've done is just like give white a bunch of card draw because Commander players wanted it. Related to that, he also calls out they've adapted their design process to accept more feedback from customers and really take into account what the customers are saying in their design process. As far as lessons learned, he calls out that they need to be more conscious about backwards compatibility. This is something that I definitely agree with. I feel like there are so many cards that, you want to play your cards together. One of the biggest examples of this that I see that was sort of like a mistake was the day-night mechanic on werewolves, where it's a minor difference if you have the previous werewolves that trigger in one way and the day-night werewolves in the new set that work slightly differently. But can you imagine actually building a werewolf commander deck at this point and being like, here, I've got all my werewolves. They all work in 3 slightly different ways. Like, that's just... I couldn't imagine doing that at this point.
I am surprised they made that choice because of how obviously important Commander is to them in their design process. And the result of doing day-night that way literally means what you just said, which is that you can't really build a Commander deck reasonably with Werewolf mechanic from all the Werewolves Magic's ever printed, which is not that many. It's not a creature type they return to a bunch. So the fact that they kind of undermined that deck's viability with the way they did that mechanic was definitely surprising to me when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of made sense to me. I was not that surprised to it because I think it just works a lot better in a lot of ways. The one downside to it being the fact that the state continues to be tracked even once it's not relevant, potentially. But I do think that mechanic works a lot better, but it really does break the backwards compatibility. The next thing he mentions is that they need to be more careful about complexity. This one is a little bit of a surprise to me. It's not something that I would have thought that they would have talked about, but it's definitely been my experience that they have amped up the complexity in a big, big way. Talking about like the peak complexity to me is the double-faced Deans from Strixhaven, and all these recent sets I think are, similarly wordy and complex.
There was a double-faced Dean in a draft we did last night of someone else's cube, and I heard you say, I'm literally not going to read this card. I'm not flipping it over to look at the back.
Unfortunately, no one played it against me. And then the last thing they mentioned, which I definitely feel has been a challenge for them, is they have to be more conscious about the way they talk about their products. I think that a lot of people have just been, whether it's talking about the flavor of different sets or what actually is in the packs of different sets and what the different kinds of boosters are, I feel like the community has been very vocal about being just confused sometimes. And we talk a lot about how important expectations are. People might enjoy an experience, but if they think they're getting into some other kind of experience, they just won't approach it with the right kind of mindset to get what's actually valuable out of it, right?
Yeah. So I want to go back to the complexity thing briefly, because we've talked about it a lot on this show. You and I strongly prefer simple cards to complex ones, and I think every time we put a complex card in one of our cubes, it's because the value it offers is worth the complexity. It's not because the complexity is ever good per se, I don't think. It's because what the card does is interesting enough that it's worth paying that cost of that complexity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to phrase it. Like, Magic is a complex game, and the complexity is where a lot of the fun comes from.
I think Magic's pretty easy.
But that complexity does come at a cost. So I literally think of it that way. I want
Right.
the environment to be complex, but it is a cost, and I want to make sure that all of the complexity that is there is all contributing to the fun. So if there are
all relevant, right?
And
There's-
relevant, yeah. So if we have this modal double-faced Dean, I'm just going to use these as my signpost for horrible Magic cards from now on. There's a lot of complexity there that's just not going to matter. You're going to play your Dean in your deck that's mostly one color and is probably never going to be able to cast the other side, but I've got a treasure token, so maybe in this context I could. Like, on one hand, that is interesting in the sense that there can be a lot of variety, but it just isn't contributing to the fun. So yeah, complexity needs to make up for the amount of fun that it's bringing.
I'm going to take this as an opportunity to go on a little bit of a rant. He didn't talk about alchemy cards here. We've never talked about alchemy cards on this show. Maybe it's because alchemy is technically in next year's block, or maybe alchemy is just not relevant enough for Mark to discuss it.
He's also very much not involved in the arena team, is my understanding.
Great. Well, the specialized cards in alchemy, which I think most people listening will probably have heard of or seen, these are cards that basically have 5 different versions. So there's 6 different versions. There's the core card that you cast, and then you can, I think, pay some cost and discard a card from your hand. And based on the color of the discarded card, it transforms that permanent into another permanent and gives it other abilities. And I was thinking about this. It seems like an awful design, even for digital Magic to me, for a lot of reasons. One of them, for example, the art doesn't even change. It just kind of like gets color shifted, so you don't actually have the sense of a real transformation happening. It feels very kind of cheap. And also just the amount of complexity on this card. Now, this card is a 6-sided Magic card. It's
a cube, if you will.
It's a cube, and I don't think that complexity is earned. I mean, caveats. I don't play Arena. I haven't played with the specialized cards. Maybe some people love them, but when I look at those cards, Anthony, all I think is there are so many ways in Magic's core rules to accomplish such a similar thing with things that already exist. So, for example, to me, you know what's a great specialized card? Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Mage can be anything. You pay 2 mana and you play a white. Oh, now it's a Swords of Plowshares. You pay 2 mana and you pay a black. Now it's a Thoughtseize. You pay 2 mana and you play a red. Now it's a Lightning Bolt. So that's a very mechanically simple card that has all of that depth, all of those different ways it can play in the game. The same goes for Eternal Witness. Same goes for a card like Restoration Angel. Whatever you flicker, is going to totally change what that card does. And that to me is what makes Magic great. These specialized designs are like totally isolated, totally self-contained, and I get that they're technically a little bit different, right? The fact that they care about the card you're discarding is different than any of the examples I gave, but there are so many better ways to make a modular creature that can do different things that are not just like, we gave it 6 sides because we can now, because the rules text box has a scroll bar because we're playing digitally.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the core of what I think are great Magic designs, is where the individual component itself is very simple, very grokkable. You read it, you know what the card does, but the complexity comes from how you combine that cards with other cards. It just is such a more easy to... you still have that depth, but the individual pieces are easy to read and understand, and that is super valuable to me.
Absolutely. The other thing I want to say about complexity is that Mark talks about it very briefly. He kind of touches on these points at a very high level. He's not going into super detail about them, but his mention of complexity basically says, like, Magic got more complex, that kind of has to happen because we were making new cards and it's hard to make simple cards because we've made so many cards before. And he says that they have to keep this in mind because of all the new players of Magic. There's always going to be new players in Magic. And I was a little disappointed to see this because it seems like, at least Mark maybe, that is primarily thinking about complexity as a cost to new players, whereas I see it as a cost to all players, including the most enfranchised players. I play a ton of Magic, I'm very enfranchised, and I really dislike complicated cards because it adds more stuff for me to have to keep track of as a player, and as you've alluded to, so much of that complexity oftentimes is not actually contributing to a strategic depth of the game. It's like, well, this Dean has 2 sides. One side's probably better than the other side, and you're probably playing that side most of the time, but you know what? 5% of the time you actually do play this other side, so you as a player have to be aware of that, and your opponent has to be aware of that and know that that's an option, even though it's only going to happen 5% of the time, and they both have a big block of rules text. I find there's a lot of cards these days that are complicated in ways where it's just like more, not necessarily strategically interesting.
How much do you think that digital Magic has influenced this, especially thinking about the complexity being more of a cost for new players, but a lot of new players are being introduced to the game through Arena, which means more than anything that the system is actually keeping track of everything for them. So
right. There's no missed triggers.
Exactly. You can do a lot of complicated triggers and stuff like that where, you just... drag the card out of your hand and it just does what it does. You don't have to worry too much unless you're trying to target the things in the correct order with Sublime Epiphany or whatever.
Right.
Do you think that's something that they think about and has influenced or just allowed them to feel comfortable amping up the complexity?
I think it's undeniable that digital Magic has had a big impact on the design of Magic cards. And I think it's in the ways you described, right? I think we are more likely to find complexity in places like triggered abilities than in places like modal targeted abilities, because a card like Sublime Epiphany is kind of a nightmare to resolve on Arena. And I haven't done it, but I've seen people do it, where it's like
fun.
it makes each ability a different color, and then you have to look at the color of the line that you're dragging and make sure you click the right thing based on the rules text. That is clunky online. And if Magic was a video game, you probably wouldn't do that almost ever. It's just that those cards work so well on paper that in that case, the digital players have to bite the bullet. And in a lot of cases, paper players have to bite the bullet. One of the best examples I can think of is I love targeted card draw. I would much rather every card that says draw cards just allow me to target my opponent if I want to. It also seems to me like that's a really cool impact for Commander for playing political games, but so often now we get card draw that is just untargeted, because that means that when you cast a spell in Arena or Magic Online, you don't have to name a target. You just play it and the thing happens, which is a much more satisfying experience, especially an example of cards like that where 99% of the time you're going to be targeting yourself, but every once in a while you do want to target your opponent for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. I feel like there is that challenge where on one hand we're saying having a lot of complexity that leads to things that usually don't matter is not fun, but also it is fun in other cases. And the difference really just is how much...
Well, the difference is the card just says target player draws 3 cards, right?
Right. There is a little... It's a little bit more complex in that you do have technically a decision point, but as far as how easy it is to read and understand what that card does, it's very low cost to getting that tiny edge case of every once in a while you'll deck your opponent with it. Whereas just adding a bunch more text, it's just a different balance.
Yeah, to me there's a huge difference between knowing that you can get Stroke of Genius for 15 to mill you out in some ancient control mirror and having to read both sides of some double-sided card that you've not seen that often and have to remember what that rules text does so you know what might happen to you in the future.
Yeah, so I'm really curious how this actually gets implemented and what the details of taking this understanding that they need to be more careful with complexity, how does that translate to shifts in the way that they design sets and cards?
Yeah. The next thing I want to talk about is the adjustments to the color pie. As you mentioned, this is mostly changes to white, which is the color that, as I understand it, has suffered in Commander for a long time. It's actually funny, though. I almost feel like back when we were playing a lot of Commander, this was not a thing I heard be complained about that often. And I think it's partially because we were playing mostly when they hadn't printed a lot of Commander-specific cards. And so every color was kind of clunky in the sense that you were playing cards that were not designed to, for the most part, accrue tons of value in a multiplayer game the way that so many Commander cards are designed. I almost feel like the problems with white either emerged or were strongly exacerbated by all of the Commander-focused design, which does have limited space in white's color identity in the color pie to make powerful cards. And so you get this panoply of just really powerful cards in different gold colors and all the other colors in Magic and all the Commander constructed products and Commander draft sets, but you don't have that much space to make white cards that can match the power level of those cards.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, that makes a lot of sense if you're
Do you remember anybody ever complaining about white being bad in Commander the 8 years ago when we were playing a lot of Commander 7 years ago?
I definitely don't, but I also would treat that as pretty anecdotal.
Definitely
we're
anecdotal.
Playing with a local play group. I mean, a substantial local play group, but still, that's not the impression of the community as a whole. But that does make a lot of sense. You're printing a green card or a black card. Sure, it can buy back something from the graveyard every single turn. You're printing a blue card. Of course, we can add draw 3 cards to that. No problem. Red is kind of interesting. I'm surprised that red ends up being translating to Commander in some ways a lot
I think a lot of it is like artifact stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like burn spells don't really see playing Commander, but the really big sorceries and the big enchantments, like the big payoffs, like what's that new red enchantment that copies things at random from Streets of New Capenna Commander? Can't remember what it is.
Andy is talking about Arcane Bombardment.
You get cards like that. You also get all the artifact synergies, and artifacts are huge in that format because of mana rocks and other kinds of incidental cards.
But white, on the other hand, in 2-player 20 life Magic is much more focused on, tempo and minor tax effects and things like that, which, it doesn't create as much design space for multiplayer design.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at white's color pie, what white gets is really good targeted removal, which targeted removal is relevant in Commander. Swords to Plowshares is a staple of the format, but it's oftentimes much less valuable than it would be in one-on-one because unlike in one-on-one Magic, which is a zero-sum between you and your opponent, I remove your thing, that's a 1-for-1. We're both on equal footing, except I got to choose what I removed. I'm probably up on mana. In a multiplayer game, if player A removes player B's threat, then players C and D are better off than players A and B are because they didn't spend any resources and still that threat got removed. So I think single target removal doesn't scale that well to multiplayer. The other thing white gets is the best cheap creatures. You look at the best creatures at other points in the mana curve, like green gets better expensive creatures, But the cheap creatures is where white really shines, and a lot of those cheap creatures just aren't relevant in a game where players start with 40 life.
But Savannah Lions is so efficient.
So efficient, it's true.
So I think we're talking me into being a little bit more forgiving about this. That, yeah, I mean, maybe a change did have to happen because so much of Magic is played multiplayer today where it wasn't 10, 15 years ago.
My take is I think it is a bad sign that Magic design and development felt this was a problem they had to fix because of vocal complaining by a particular constructed formats players. I don't think that sets a great precedent. And I think there's an interesting conversation we can have about what it means to like listen to the player base and listen to customer feedback, because I think a lot of people think it means if enough people ask for X, you should do X, because that's what people asking for it means. It means you should do it. And I don't feel that way. I feel pretty strongly that is not a good, sustainable approach to designing the game. But I think when it comes to the actual cards they've printed that explore this new space of Magic's color pie and white, I think they're great. I think they're fine. I have absolutely no problem with Archivist of Ogma or Deep Gnome Terramancer or
Esper Sentinel.
I have no problem with any of these cards. I think they totally fit White's identity. I think they have tackled this difficult challenge admirably. I think they did a great job solving this problem. I don't like that they thought they had to solve this problem in the first place. That's the part that I think gives me pause.
I don't love those cards. Partly just because I have a
you.
mono white commander deck, and now and they're played against me, and now I have to go buy those cards.
That is true.
But
You do. I mean, that means they're winning. If you have to go buy the new cards, then they have really succeeded at their goals.
Yeah, not great. I just want to, destroy everyone's lands. That's a powerful ability. That's another weird thing about this thing. It's like white does have some of the most powerful effects in Commander. It's got land destruction. It has Caracas. It has cool stuff like that.
Caracas ain't in Commander, buddy.
I'm aware, but maybe it should be. Like if you want to make this color better, we could just embrace that side of it. But I totally agree. I mean, when somebody is faced with an issue and they present their issue to you, often they are not presenting their actual experience and what is negative about their experience. They're presenting their solution to it. I mean,
even if they are presenting their experience, so if someone's complaining they didn't get a good Werewolf Commander for their Werewolf Commander deck from the pre-constructed decks from Midnight Hunt, an individual person's complaint or grievance, even when multiplied by 10,000 people's same grievance, does not in any way indicate that that's a good, sustainable choice for the long-term health of the game. It might be the best choice for selling more cards tomorrow, right? Because there's a lot of people that are actively asking for those cards. And I think it's really telling that you said, like, one of the reasons you don't like these cards is now, for your mono white commander deck, you kind of have to go get all of them, and they're all like $15-20 basically to get any of those cards. And that's how you know they did a good job by their metrics, right? Because we have to acknowledge that Wizards of the Coast is a for-profit company. And look, I want Magic to make money, right? They pay artists, I think, like $5,000 a piece for every piece of card art, and a new set has 300 cards in it, basically. So you're talking just huge amounts of money that go into paying the artists to do the art for the cards, paying the designers to design the game. These are things I want people to get paid for. I want Wizards to make money. And so I understand the drive there. But I do think that serving that goal of we should try and make as much money as possible, continue to grow the game, and equating that to fun, like people must be having fun because they're spending a bunch of money on this product, I don't think is great for Magic health 5, 10, 15 years down the line. I think it's great for right now, right? It's great for next year. It's great for tomorrow. But I think as time goes on, a lot of those effects become things that people didn't predict, didn't care about when they asked for the thing. And it changes the game in these subtle ways that people aren't anticipating.
You know, the biggest thing that actually struck me about this article and is coming through in this conversation as well is Mark Rosewater basically just talked about Commander.
Literally only Commander.
Commander was mentioned 26 times in this article. You know, in some product names as well, but 26 instances.
Zero mentions of Modern.
He talked about
zero
Draft.
Mentions of Legacy. Zero mentions of Pioneer. Zero mentions of Historic. Zero mentions of Standard. He mentioned Retail Limited a couple times.
11 times.
And the rest is literally entirely Commander, which I expect, right? Like, that's what I expect R&D conversations look like based on the cards they print, right? We look at cards from every set now, and it's like every set is a Commander set. There's tons of cards here that are clearly designed with Commander in mind. And as Cube players, my gripes about this are very minimal because, as we've said before, if you don't like a card, don't play it. And I just simply don't play almost any of the cards that are designed for Commander. My only concern is just what that means for the long-term health of the game if they feel so beholden to this very popular format that, it must be said, is not how Magic was intended to be played, right? This is a made-up format that was invented by some judges and adjusts the rules of Magic and changes the way the game is meant to be played. That is not how Richard Garfield designed it. It's not how the first 10, 15 years of research and development around the game and new cards were designed. It's a different kind of game, and I think we have to accept to some degree Magic is morphing into that game, and there's going to be less and less space available for people that do want to play one-on-one, do want to build cubes, that care about standard or, constructed or whatever, because there's just a lot of time spent on this, which more cards is always just good for cube players, right? Every time a new card is printed, you don't lose any other cards, right? So you don't lose any of the stuff you already had. You just get another option. Even if that's an option that you're only going to use 0.5% of the time or whatever, it's still just more. So in that sense, it's fine.
The buffet gets bigger. There might be some stuff on the buffet you don't like, but everything you wanted before is still there.
Right. There is something to be said for the idea of all of that energy, right? All of the time spent by the design team, all the time spent by the development team, all the time spent by the artists and the flavor team, all of that work going into cards that I don't like, right? Like if they printed new sets where I only cared about 2 or 3 cards from the entire set, what I said is still true, but I would be pretty upset. I'd be like, look, this game is unrecognizable to me at this point, and we're not there yet.
You're sort of expecting a degree of velocity of new stuff that is applicable to you, but if you're losing that velocity, it feels like you're losing something potentially.
It feels like the game is changing, and I imagine if we follow this trend, then, obviously this is the old meme where if this trend continues, then it's obviously a trend that can't possibly continue. But, if it was to continue and in 5 years, Magic products were 85-90% cards that were clearly meant for Commander, and then a couple other cards sprinkled in there for other formats, I would not like the game as much, right? I would probably be some boomer that was mostly playing old Magic cards and not new ones, and I would still be doing Cube stuff because I love Cube, and I can do that on my own terms, but it is a change in the game that is happening that we can't ignore.
Definitely. I mean, on one hand, I think there's something extremely beautiful and wonderful about that, to say, here's this game. The game is largely about choosing your own way to play it. You're not opening up the Monopoly box and playing the one game with this fixed set of pieces. You're kind of participating in the game design experience just by building a deck and deciding the way that you want to play Magic. So it's such a natural extension to say, okay, well, we can take these game pieces and tweak a few rules and get a very different experience and a compelling experience out of it. And for the game designers to then say, okay, we see you're enjoying it this way. Let's actually engage with you and adapt and grow the game towards the experience that you're looking to have. In one sense, that's extremely wonderful. The Commander community also can be quite negative, I think, though, and sort of expect that the game must change for them, which to me, that colors it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think overall there is a positive aspect to it.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. If Magic were to continue to grow, continue to make more money year over year for the next 10 years, do you think that means that Magic as a game at the end of that 10 years is inherently in a better place than it was before if it continues to grow and make money or whatever? Like if this bubble never pops, if we continue to just like ride this and, basically prop up all of Hasbro with their Wizards of the Coast arm, if we continue to ride this wave, do you think it means the game is better in 10 years than it is now?
I mean, how do you define better? Is it more fun?
I'm asking
for me?
you how you define it.
I would say yes. The biggest factor being having more people in the game means just that's positive to me, right?
Maybe. You and I build websites. We've talked about this in passing on the show before, and we have a lot of conversations with our clients sometimes who want to track analytics about their website, right? They want to know how many people are on our website, what pages are they visiting, how much time are they spending, etc. And I think a lot of times things that seem intuitive, that seem like they would be good or positives, actually don't make a lot of sense when you fully unpack them. So, for example, if you have some website that is meant to be a repository of information, right? It's like a wiki or something. It's some reference tool people come to like find some information they need. It's very common for people to look at that and say, all right, well, we want to maximize for time spent on the site. We want people to spend a lot of time on our site and read a lot of our content and learn a lot about this thing we're trying to educate them about. When in reality, if it's meant to be a reference tool, it might actually be a better thing for the performance of that tool if people spend very little time on the site. I came to the site, I got what I wanted, I left. The site did its job, and I got what I needed.
Right, so if you're sort of evolving and iterating on your website, if you're doing A/B testing, you could say, oh, well, people spend a lot more time on this version of the site, so it must be better, when in reality, you might just be like making the navigation more confusing, right, making it harder to actually find the information on the pages.
Right, and then you look at like, oh, well, our average time spent on site has gone up and our average number of pages visited has gone up. Look, all these trend lines are good. And what it actually means is you've made the site more confusing. And to be honest, if you put on a little bit of glasses and look at the internet through this lens, you will see the results of this kind of decision making all over the internet.
Right, because I mean, we're getting a little off topic.
Not really. Let's keep going.
Okay. But I mean, in reality, the bottom line for most websites is not make it useful, make it good for the people that are viewing it, make the information accessible. It is keep them on the site as long as possible so we get more ad clicks, more ad views. And we see that result. Have you been on, like, the internet is almost unusable. I don't know how people cope with this.
I sometimes have to like go on another machine, like my mother's machine or something, and look at the internet without an ad blocker, and I'm like, how does it it's no surprise that the only thing people do on the internet if they have no ad blocker is just go on Facebook, because the rest of the internet is literally unusable. It is, you go to a website and it's just pop-ups for end of days, and you can't, everything's moving, you can't find the information you're looking for.
With our chat bots, man, you sent me a link to a website the other day.
That was one of the worst websites I have ever seen in my entire life.
40 pixels of an image that was the actual content, and then overlapped by, join our newsletter. Here's all this confusing stuff. Read these related articles. Agree to cookies.
The join our newsletter thing is, I think, one of the most concise examples. Almost any website you go to now will have a pop-up where when you arrive at the site, maybe it'll be generous and wait 15 seconds or something. That can happen sometimes. Most websites will just hit you with a pop-up. It says, sign up for our newsletter. Here's why they do that. Some people will. Even if it's only 1% or 0.5% of the people for whom that pops up, some people will sign up for that newsletter. And then when they send the next newsletter out trying to sell something, some people will buy something. And the cost is annoying everybody. But annoying everybody is not actually going to affect their bottom line, right? Like if you're selling some product, if a company has some product you want to buy, you are not going to go to their website and leave because you had to click an X on a newsletter button. You're going to be like, well, that's annoying. I'm not going to sign up for your newsletter. And then you're still going to go buy the thing.
I'm boycotting. I'm boycotting newsletters.
Well, then good. You're doing some activism out there. Most people won't, right? They're going to go buy the thing that they wanted to buy. So because it offers this small edge in the capitalist sense of we eventually need to sell more things to these people, it is worth making the experience noticeably worse for every single person to, 1 out of every 10,000 sell one more widget to them. And it's that logic that has resulted in the internet we have today. And how this connects to Magic, to me, is that based on what I see in Mark Rosewater's State of Design article and what I've observed in Magic for the past 5-6 years, I feel like they are very attentive to who is spending money on Magic. I think they're optimizing for people spending money on the game. I also think they're optimizing for the things that people complain about that they hear in their surveys and that Mark hears on social media all day, people just complaining about the same things over and over again. I think those are the two main driving forces. And what they can't really track, or they aren't really tracking successfully right now, is long-term investment in the game, is people that actually love the game and play it and teach other people about it and introduce it to people like we do, which we don't spend as much money on the game as a lot of other players do, frankly. And so
I spend a fair amount of money on the game.
Right. You are a buy most secret layers kind of person, which
I hate myself increasingly. I mean, but from this conversation, it's so clear. It's like you're totally right. These are the same. They make a new secret layer. People buy it. They're optimizing for their profits, and it's working. They can just keep doing this.
Right.
But what they're not measuring is player happiness and the experience of the game day to day.
Right.
And honestly,
buying more stuff does not mean the game is better. Right?
Honestly, for my experience, it's like I have this commander deck and it's got a bunch of all kinds of alternate stuff, and it's just getting to a point where it's like, actually, this is just like a site with a bunch of pop-up ads. It's like all these cards are harder to read. They're harder to understand. I can't understand the cards on the other side of the table that are all kinds of weird additions. Like, that is becoming a meaningful negative, and it is... On one hand, it's like, oh yeah, I love this one individual new promo. I'm so excited to go buy it and put it in my deck. But the net effect is it's getting to be a lot. I feel like we're getting really negative here. But
well, I mean, to me, an important perspective on this is that the free market is really good at doing some things. We have to acknowledge, right? Like, and what the free market is really good at doing...
iPhones. I don't think we get iPhones under a different system, probably.
Right. Well, the free market is really good at giving people what they ask for and they're willing to pay money for, right? And that's what we see in Magic. It's what we see in, other industries in general. And when I look at Magic, and specifically Magic's relationship to Commander today, it makes me think of things like the Marvel movies, right? In some ways, the Marvel movies are like the apotheosis of all of cinema, right? Like, we've figured it out. We've figured out how to make the most money on a movie. And we've seen this pattern just rehashed over and over again for the past, 10, 12 years, where it's like Iron Man was successful in 2007 or whenever the hell that was. And so now we get a new Marvel movie every year or two every year. And every single time it makes like $1 zillion million at the box office. And so movies are solved. Like, capitalism figured it out. It figured out how to like maximize movies. Does that mean that Marvel movies are the best movies? Are the best kind of cinema? Are artistic, creative endeavors that people can do with film? Absolutely not, I don't think. I don't think anyone would argue that. They're like addictive candy that people can't get enough of, and they use IP that's recognizable to people so that they can get excited about the thing before it happens and feel like they're a part of this big universe. And the Marvel movies are for sure beloved, and I'm sure lots of listeners love the Marvel movies. I'm not dragging the Marvel movies. I'm just saying that is one kind of thing that movies can be, but it's the thing that the free market optimizes for. And that's why that's most of what we get now. We get so many Marvel movies and also other things, right? Like look at the Star Wars franchise, which has now been 2 new movies every year, and that's going to be happening for the rest of time, or until it stops making money, right? Everything is a remake because people don't want to take a risk, and they know that this is a successful way to get people in seats and to sell tickets. That is what the free market is optimizing for in movies, right? It's optimizing for selling those tickets and getting people in the seats. And you could say more people are buying tickets. They must love these movies more. These must be better movies because that's our measure of that. But that's such a small piece of the overall pie. And I think it's kind of a little bit of what I see happening with Commander, where it's like, Commander's great. Everyone loves Commander. Look how much Commander sells Magic product. Let's give them 2 Commander products every single year. And every single set now has Commander decks. Everything's Commander decks. And at the end of the day, does that make Commander a better format? Does it make Magic a better game? I don't think so. I think it sells more Magic packs, which is one piece of the success of the game. And like I said, I want Wizards to make money. I want this game to continue to have access to great creative resources and talented people to make the game. But I do see a little bit of that in Magic's relationship to specifically Commander. What's the worst Marvel movie?
I don't think I've seen all that many of them.
I haven't seen any except for Iron Man. What's the worst? I also saw Black Panther. What's the worst Marvel movie? I'm Googling it now. Ghost Rider, The Punisher Warzone. Oh, Morbius. That's a good example. If people hated Morbius, that was pretty funty.
I still don't know what that is.
Here's all you have to know. Morbius became a meme because, first of all, it's funny to say it's Morbin time. The reason it became a meme, though, is that it was a movie that came out and it totally tanked. Everyone hated it, didn't sell tickets. It was a flop. And then a bunch of people online, kind of as a joke, were like, we love Morbius. Like, it's Morbin time. Let's turn it into a meme. And they convinced Sony Pictures to put it back in theaters because they thought, oh, there's a resurgent excitement around Morbius, and then it flopped again. No one actually went to see it. People just wanted to make jokes about it online. No one wanted to see Morbius. That's why people are talking about it. It's very funny. That's
really indicative
of
our time.
Yeah, it really is. Anyway, at some point, we're going to get the Morbius of Commander products where people are going to be like, actually, we don't like this anymore, and this is bad, and you're going to have a bunch of people sitting around a boardroom at Hasbro or at WotC going like, what happened? We were giving them what they wanted, and now it's Morbin time.
And now they're all playing Cube because they've discovered the greatest format.
Fingers crossed.
So this conversation didn't go exactly like I expected.
It went exactly as I expected.
Great. Maybe we should talk a little bit about just what we liked from the last year in terms of like mechanics for Cube.
Before we do that, I wanted to talk about the things I was just surprised about. The 2 things that really surprised me in this article were related to Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. Specifically, Mark said that everyone loved backgrounds and that they also loved the initiative. And I'm not saying this is not true. I have no idea. I don't play enough Commander. I don't listen to Commander podcasts or follow the community. I believe it's totally true. I'm surprised it's true. I'm surprised that players like those mechanics because they both feel very clunky to me. And I imagine this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. I imagine a lot of Commander players liked backgrounds because what it does is let them play more cards in their Commander deck. It lets them change the color identity of their Commander deck by adding this thing to it. It gives them more options. And so I like what I can do with one Commander and one background. Therefore, I like background mechanic. They're not saying the background mechanic is a healthy thing that's going to help the game in the long run. They're saying, I got to make a deck I wanted to make. Therefore, this mechanic is good. I don't understand the initiative at all, to be honest. I think the mechanic is kind of a mess. I don't get why people enjoy it, but that's just me being out of touch. Surely it's the children who are wrong.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
So I actually do love, I like the background mechanics so much more than partner. I think it is very flavorful. It's like, here's not only my commander, but I get to customize my commander. I feel like that very much appeals to people that, also appreciate that general aspect of the format where you get to pick your leader and rally behind them. But it is a little clunky. It's a lot going on.
All right, let's end this on things that we loved from the past year, Anthony. Where do you want to start?
What was your favorite set?
Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
Great. Same. We did it.
I think it's a fantastic set. Mark even mentions in the article it was the most successful, best received set of the year. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. The card designs were really interesting. The limited format was great. I think there was a lot of pent up affection for this plane that has been slowly building since the 15 years ago, whenever it was we were last in Kamigawa. And so that catharsis of finally going back, I think was always going to be a success pretty much. I think it'd be hard to screw that up, to be honest. the way he portrays it, it's like, oh, we perfectly skated this line. And yeah, I think they did a great job with the balance of new technology versus like old world rituals and traditions. But I think they were set up to succeed basically by going back to this plane, which was really flavorful the first time around and has beautiful art and stuff, but really fell flat on mechanics and fell flat on some references to Japanese culture that the vast majority of players didn't understand. And with those lessons learned, they were able to like really capitalize on the good parts of that block and bring out more interesting things about that, which I think brings me to my favorite mechanic of the year, which I think is reconfigure. I really like the reconfigure mechanic.
That's what I've got written down too. I mean, I think that this set all together, just with it was in a lot of ways very backwards compatible, unlike some of these other sets where reconfigure all kinds of things, care about equipment and care about power and toughness. There's a little bit of issues with some things that care specifically about equip that don't actually work with reconfigure, but for the most part, it's a very flexible mechanic. And same with all the artifact and enchantment themes. Sagas, I think, work well and are pretty backwards compatible in terms of you can proliferate with them and they just make creatures and stuff cares about creatures. So
it also just feels like how it should work. It feels very natural.
Right.
I was playing with Dancing Blade yesterday, which is a card that kind of resembles some kind of reconfigure things. You have to equip it first, and then when the creature that's equipped dies, you may turn it into a creature, and then it's no longer an equipment. You can't equip it anymore. But I was like, why isn't this just a reconfigure card? Tweak the numbers a bit so it's balanced for that mechanic, but reconfigure is just such a natural way to say, like, you've got a creature, you've got an equipment, and you can like navigate the space in between, and that creates a lot of interesting decisions and allows you to like hedge in different ways based on the game state that are really satisfying.
And obviously, flavor-wise, it just fits with the sort of cyberpunk aesthetic of here's my cool robot dog that I can then, grab and turn into a sword or whatever. It very, very much works for me.
Which is kind of a bummer because I think that means we won't see it reconfigure again for a bit. Because
you can magically reconfigure stuff.
I guess
think it'll be fine.
Could be some pile of weapons animated by magic. I could see that happening.
And I do really think that just like flavor-wise, the way they decided to revisit this plane, I think was very compelling. And I think it's just a very smart solution. Like you said, there were a lot of issues with the first visit to Kamigawa, but there was some like sort of cult following, people that really loved it.
Yeah.
So coming up with a totally different way to say, how do we revisit this without really revisiting it and give us space to do new stuff? I think that worked really well.
The other thing I really liked from last year from a design perspective, I thought the arc we saw with the disturb mechanic was really interesting. And it was one of my more favorite mechanics of the year in terms of double face mechanics that I actually like and think work well. And I love flashback. This is essentially creature flashback. And I thought it was really interesting how in Midnight Hunt, we saw disturb on spirits that basically came back as whatever they were previously with flying for the most part. And then in Crimson Vow, we saw disturb cards that came back as auras. I think every time. Maybe there was a couple exceptions, but creatures that died, and then you could cast an aura out of your graveyard basically to enhance another creature by the abilities and baseline stats of the front side of that disturb card. I think it's a really elegant mechanic, and I like the way that it plays, and I especially loved that kind of like 1-2 punch between the different blocks. I actually really like multi-set blocks more than just visiting a plane once. And I think I'm glad that we're getting kind of a mix of that now. I think there was a lot of problems with the 3-step block model where every single thing had to be a 3-step block, right? Historically, the second and third sets of every single block were just like nowhere near as beloved. Everyone didn't like them as much. And so they then kind of cut that and went to just like 1-set blocks where every set kind of stands alone. And now we're actually seeing, what I think is the best solution, which is based on whatever the plane and the story you're trying to tell is and how successful the mechanics are and how happy you are with the designs. Something should be a 2-step block, something should be a 1-step block, something should be a 4-step block that we're going to get next year. And I think that's like the right way to handle it, right? Like don't have a pattern you jam every single block into, but just do what's right for each block based on whatever creative decisions and influences that block has.
Yeah, and I think the multi-block system, especially, or multi-step blocks, when we're talking about draft where things were actually drafted together, that presented a lot of design challenges
for sure.
and weird complexities. But I do appreciate, like you're saying, that they are still doing some sort of mechanical tie-ins between different sets because, and that still, I think, is meaningful, even if most of the time you're not drafting these together. It still impacts Standard, which according to this article may or may not exist, and kitchen table if you just happen to be buying recent sets. If these mechanics work well together, that's going to be valuable. And I just like doing like wacky drafts, chaos drafts, things like that. So I would be totally into seeing more sets that can be combined in different ways to create new novel formats.
This is another good example of how parsing customer feedback is difficult because it's easy to see how they get both kinds of feedback. We went to a plane I loved, like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and I only got one of it. I want more. He gets a bunch of questions. Why isn't there a second Kamigawa set? Because it was so great and we all loved it. Conversely, we have a big block that the second and third set maybe aren't as good or whatever. If you get people complaining, why are we still on this stupid plane? I hate this place. This is stupid. Why are we doing a block format like this? No one's ever going to ask for the opposite pretty much, right? No one's ever going to say like, hey, this was a one-set block and it was perfect one-set block. Good job for doing that. Or, hey, this was a multi-set block and it worked out great, actually. We really liked how it told the story across 3 blocks. Like, good job with that.
Yeah, when you're satisfied, you're just satisfied and quiet.
And so whatever they do, they're going to get complaints that are pushing them in the opposite direction because that's what complaints are. They're just the opposite thing. Ultimately, I think it comes down to like, if you did a good block that was a 2-part block or a 3-part block or a 4-part block, then great. If you did a great set that was a standalone set, then people are going to want more of it. And I think you as the creative team behind it have to decide whether or not that's appropriate. Maybe that block was so successful because it was a standalone thing and a return to Kamigawa would have been awful, right? It's entirely possible all these people that are like, why wasn't there a second set in the Kamigawa block because we all loved it so much, if actually given that second set, would have said, this is bad, why'd you do this? This was not a good idea. I thought we agreed a long time ago that we shouldn't do block format anymore. It's impossible to please people, man.
It really is.
The last thing I really liked from last year, I thought the wedding setting on Crimson Vow was really cool and interesting. And I think a really cool departure in terms of what Magic can be and what the setting can be. I know some players didn't like that it wasn't more gothic horror-y or wasn't more creepy or whatever, but I thought it was a really interesting setting and I was a fan.
Interesting. There are definitely some cool top-down designs there as well, like the hearse that gets crewed with 2 creatures and things like that.
Those are my least favorite parts of it.
Oh, okay. Well, you can't please everybody all the time.
Right. I just liked it as a creative direction.
What would your off-the-wall, like, totally different setting that you'd like to see be?
I don't know. That's too much pressure to put me on at the end of the show. Okay. I'll think about it. I'll come back to you next week, which will be in quite a few weeks as far as people are concerned, because we're recording a lot ahead of time. But I will get back to you on that.
A few minutes later.
Actually, I have an answer for you. I lied. It's a set that's all about cooking and food.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, easy. Basically, imagine like Top Chef or Ratatouille. Combine those things and make it all about and make that a whole Magic set. Make it happen somehow. Are we done, Anthony? Is that our state of design?
I think so. I mean, we maybe are more just talking about the state of things than just Magic design. But I mean, Magic design is part of things.
Magic design does fall in the set of things. That is true. And as Wizards continues to grow and Magic continues to grow as a game, I think the free market forces on it are going to change substantially. When Magic was a game that was played by just a particular subset of people that really wanted to play a particular kind of nerdy card game, there was a certain set of market forces, and as they, to their credit, more and more appeal to people that maybe wouldn't have identified as a Magic player before, don't think of themselves as being interested in these kinds of things, that's going to inherently mean that you're going to get different forces from people when you do surveys and look at what's selling and whatnot. So yeah, the game's going to change, and I think it's important to acknowledge the pros and cons of designing a game like this under free market capitalism, which has a lot of pros and a lot of cons.
Sure does.
And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode. Oh, he's got his hand up. He wants to say something. Yes, you in back.
I'm just gesticulating. It's not like I'm over here raising my hand to speak in the classroom. Thanks, Mark Rosewater. We appreciate you.
Yeah, I do want to say that. Like, I want to observe these trends and try and understand where they're coming from and what the forces are that are changing the game that we love. But none of this, to me, is a criticism of Magic R&D, right? Like, I think they are doing their job very successfully. And it's important to recognize, as a fan of the game, that their job is largely to make the stakeholders of Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast more money. And that does have some correlations with the success of the game in broader sense, but not a one-to-one correlation. There are definitely things that I think are lost if that's the only way you look at the value of the game, which I don't think is what R&D does, to be clear. But I like to put myself in the shoes of somebody working for Magic R&D when there was a big decision made to, like, we're going to start making constructed Commander products, and how I would have made the argument that maybe we shouldn't do that. And you can't, right? Like, how do you make that argument? Every single meeting you go into where you're talking about what happened last quarter, planning for the next quarter, you're going to have people sitting there saying, everyone loves this format. Why are we not giving them something they want, right? Why are we not printing cards for these people? This is like such a popular way to play the game. At some point, it becomes this intractable force, given the overall goals of Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, right? They can't afford to say, like, well, we just don't care. Like, we're going to do whatever we want and screw those people, because they are beholden to their shareholders, and there's customers there that are waiting to give them money. And so to, like, turn them away and, like, ignore them is not a reasonable thing to argue for. And I would have argued, like, this format became successful when we were paying no attention to it. We should let it continue to thrive and grow in the same way, where we're paying no attention to it, and it is this kind of grassroots thing as opposed to a top-down format we've designed. but that argument doesn't hold up in that value system.
Yeah, I mean, really, the format of Commander changed when that happened because it was before, like, it was a campy format. It was about exploring the weird and wonderful and recontextualizing things and making it very personal. And now it's not that anymore. There's
it's
awesome
just
article.
not that, right? Like, there's maybe what drew me to Commander was like taking cool cards from Magic's history and recontextualizing them. And I genuinely feel like now the vast majority of Commander decks, like 80% of their spells, are cards that were pretty much printed with Commander in mind and not things that have been recontextualized in a creative way, which is not better or worse. I mean, it's better for Magic. It's better for the game. They made a lot of money selling all those Commander cards to all those Commander players, but it definitely changed the format to something that I was no longer as interested in playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical to say. It's not better or worse, but it is different.
It's different, baby.
There was a really awesome article on this specifically on camp and how you can't really have it in a system where it's like this top-down, someone is just making the thing. On Hipsters of the Coast, which we'll link in the show notes as well. I would recommend it.
It will be there. Now we got to wrap up, Anthony. We've gone a little long. Got too excited talking about the state of design. That's been this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. It's hard to, I don't know. I think it's like 9 weeks to CubeCon, maybe 8. I can't keep track anymore.
CubeCon is coming.
CubeCon's coming
excited.
October 20th to the 23rd in Madison, Wisconsin. If you want to play all manner of cubes with us and other folks, come on out. You find more details about that at mtgcubecon.com. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All of the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, who is absolutely doing their best. This podcast is produced by Anthony and I reading Mark's super long article, thinking about it a bunch, and then speaking to microphones about it. Thanks for doing that, Anthony.
Thank you. I gotta go check that frog puddle.